Now, the distinctive thing about all the models is this. They all have a three-part structure. This is a cross-section of Moses' tabernacle, and it too had a three-part structure. And there are three entry points. The first one is here, second one is here, and the third one is here. But these are not just entry points, they also mark the spaces, because there is a varying degree of holiness. It's holy space, but less holy. It's holy space, but it's a lot holier. It is holy space, and it's absolutely holy. The first space from curtain number 1 to curtain number 2 is what we know of as outer court. The Hebrew simply means a court as in an open space. The second, which we call the holy place, is usually simply referred to as the holy. Now, because this is space, and so in English we attach the word place to it, so it makes better sense. The third space, which is between the back wall and the final curtain, in Hebrew is called the Holy of Holies. That's probably the best way to translate, because we're not sure of the exact implication of the name. It seems to indicate a hyper sense of holiness. Think of it like holiness in the highest degree, or the nth degree. Now again, in the old Bibles, this was called the most holy place. That nomenclature fails to capture the intricacy of the Hebrew phraseology. So court, holy, holy of holies. Now notice that holies is in plural in Hebrew, which means that this is not the only holy place. All places around God's home is holy, and that's why it's the Holy of Holies, which means while they're all holy, this is absolute holy, and so the old name Most Holy Place. There are two items in the courtyard: the altar of burnt offering. If you can see, this is a 190 scale model. Okay, it's a big structure. It's about 2 meters by 2 meters and nearly 2 meters in height. This is not some little altar. Think of the number of sacrifices that would have been offered every single day in Israel or throughout the year. More importantly, this altar of burnt offering, or sometimes simply referred to as the altar, is the most active furniture in the tabernacle. Activities on this altar were 24/7. Everything else had time limitations, but not this one. And Israel were taught that even the fire that was on this altar must never go out, even during their journeys. Something else about moving these furniture: whenever they moved, everything had to be in precise order. Everything had to be so precise that you could not shift the order one way or the other when you moved. Otherwise, the people who handled it would die in the process. The one piece of furniture that we have no idea what it looked like is the basin. Think of it more like a water tank, because this was the only supply of water in this tabernacle. But think of what that means. They were in the desert. They were there for 40 years. Water was in limited supply. If you had a water tank that is open like this picture here or this picture here, how long would the water last? Personally, I believe that the water tank is more like this, probably with a cover on top and faucets or taps along the side so that they can control the amount of water evaporation. This was a fairly active place, but only for the priests. They had to wash themselves, hands and feet, before they entered the sanctuary. They also had to do other kinds of washing, like washing the parts of the animal. In the first chamber, the holy place, we have a table. Now, most of you probably know this as the table of showbread. That was a mistranslation of the King James, because the Hebrew says the bread of presence. The first thing that told Israel that God was with them. It's a pretty small little table. It's about 1.5 meters long and about 0.5 meter wide and about 1.5 meters tall. That's about the size of most office tables these days, or maybe a little bit smaller. What was important is food on the table. Most people think only of the 12 pita bread, the 12 chapatis there. They're not bread in the modern sense, but there were also wine and water and drink, because this was the main food on Sabbath for the officiating priest. This bread changed only once a week, and that change was done on Sabbath, but you could not carry the bread outside, so the priest had to eat inside, and he would need liquid in order to eat the bread. So there was wine or grape juice, if you like, whatever, and there was water. Again, where did they get wine in the desert? There are a lot of mysterious elements which scholars have not been able to explain. How did this bread, which was unleavened, in other words, no yeast, no rising, no preservative, how did it last for a whole week and not spoil? How did they get wine into the sanctuary? Where did they find the grapes? The more familiar item is the menorah. Again, reducing it to the 1/90th model size I have. I don't know if you can even see this. I think yes, here may be better. In the 1/90th size model, so multiply this by 90 times and you'll get the size. It's about the size of a full-grown man. This was not a small lamp. It was actually a series of lamps, 7 of them at the top. They had a cup at the top that was filled with olive oil, and then a wick was placed in it and then lit. Now that wick would only last about 12 hours, and so they had to change the wick and refill the oil every 12 hours. So this was done every morning and every evening. It's almost like the final duty of the priest who worked for that day. There was a little altar. It's known by different names, altar of incense, but most often simply as the golden altar. And this is where the priest would actually burn incense at the top of the altar. And that incense would rise up into the Holy of Holies. When we enter the Holy of Holies, we meet the Ark of the Covenant. The most precious, the most powerful, the most energy-filled structure of the temple. The Ark of the Covenant is basically a box that's fully gold-plated, acacia wood. No, the weight was so much that you would need about 10 priests to carry it. Now the top part is the cover, which is actually removable. Now this part had angels molded at the top, as well as the thing is pure gold. It's about 10-15 centimeters thick. Imagine the amount of gold and the weight of this cover. In Hebrew it's called kaporet, and it is shaped a little bit like a throne. And so the rabbis tell us that there was a light, an artificial light that hung over the ark. The Bible does not. They call it Shekinah, and most Adventists know about the Shekinah. What is important about this, other than being a box, is what was placed inside. 3 items. Covenant tablets. This is not the tablet of the 10 Commandments, by the way. It's the document of the covenant, representing God's rulership, and then a pot of manna, representing God's providence, and then the rod of Aaron, representing God's leadership. So the covenant tablets, the manna pot, and Aaron's staff. Here's something else. How did that manna remain unspoiled inside the ark for all of their history? As far as we know, it was never removed. What was the length of Aaron's rod? So did they have to cut Aaron's rod into half, or was it a shorter staff? The third mystery is the covenant tablets. Most Adventists think the 10 Commandments are written here. That's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew says that the book of the covenant was recorded here. And it also tells us that it was written on all surfaces, front and back, and probably even the side, because it would have been fairly thick. A documentation of the covenant God made with Israel. The 10 Commandments are part of that, the 10 words, but there's a lot more. What many of us don't realize, because we don't always read the Bible carefully, whenever they travel, before the priests or Levites who were appointed to carry it could come and touch, the functioning priest for that day would have to go in, and they would have to wrap this up in 7 layers of insulation. That's how much energy they saw being attached to the ark. Then only would they be allowed to touch it and to carry it.